Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This is episode number 53 of the show. This week there were an amazing 15 new LitRPG stories that came out. So many, so little time. I could not read them all, unfortunately. I can only hit about 8 of them, and those are the ones that I'm reviewing this week. Everything else is being pushed next week. I'm sure there's going to be more stuff that's coming out next week as well. So it's been a surprisingly busy week. But the novels that I will be reviewing this week are Hero of Thera. After that, Grimoire Bound. After that, it'll be Terra, Reforma, a post-apocalyptic LitRPG series. After that, Reternity Online Rescue Quest, a LitRPG epic. Another long title name. After that, it'll be Dragon Web Online Dominion, a LitRPG adventure series, Electric Shadows, Book 2. And then after that, it'll be Fantasy Online, Hyperborea. After that, it'll be Into the Black, a sci-fi LitRPG story, Book 1, Game Start. After that, it'll be Eyrth Online, TMOLW. I'm not really sure what that means. It is episode 3, or the Trois. There's another part of that title that I can't say. Menage Drie. It's French, I think. I don't know. But that's going to be the last story that I review on this episode of the podcast. We are going to move, though, straight into LitRPG news. Okay, first story in LitRPG news is going to be with Daniel Schienehofen. I think I say that name correctly sometimes. He's the author of the LitRPG series Last Horizon and Alpha World. He has started a Patreon for his readers that want to support his writing. Supporters get some really nice rewards, like, of course, early access to the chapters he's writing, mental pats on the back, always a fun one. And, of course, they can actually get story characters named after them in the stories if they're high enough supporter tier. So go support Daniel on his Patreon. He's a good writer. I enjoy his work. Especially love the Last Horizon series. Very unique take on retirement LitRPG of virtual reality MMO players. Enjoyable. We have the link for his Patreon in the show notes. Okay. Next story. Justin Miller, author of the World Seed series, one of my favorite serialized stories, was nice enough to send the podcast an email letting us know that the audiobook producer for his World Seed series, Tantor, has decided to also produce audiobooks for World Keeper, that series that he's actually still writing. The deal apparently includes all the short stories in that series and also books 2 and 3, which have not yet been written. But of course, once they are, Tantor's going to pop out some audiobooks for you guys at home. So congratulations, Justin. Okay, next story in LitRPG news. Travis Bagwell, author of the Awaken Online series, is doing an AMA this weekend over on the LitRPG subreddit. Remember that AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. So I encourage everyone who's watching to think of the most embarrassing questions they can and go ask Travis them this weekend. The AMA starts at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on June the 3rd. The link will be in the show notes. Okay, also in LitRPG news, Alaron Kong, author of the Chaos Seed series, will be doing his second Facebook Live for you folks at home this Sunday, June 4th, 2017 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on his author page. Remember, Alaron has the LitRPG page, he has his regular page, and he has his author page, so make sure you go to the right one. Otherwise, you might miss out on asking him questions live and talking to him live on video. We'll have the link in the show notes for the correct page if you want to click on it. Okay, and lastly, we have Vasily Mihenko made a great announcement this week on Facebook. He revealed the title of the next book in the series, Wisdom Book 6, and a approximate release date for that translation. Apparently, the 6th book in that series is going to be called Shaman's Revenge, and it should be available about August the 30th, 2017. We've already added it into the upcoming LitRPG novel list that we have going on our website and our Facebook page. There is no pre-order yet for it, though. Okay, there's only one new LitRPG audiobook that came out this week that I could find. Digital Coyote, Thousand Tales, Book 3. We had a review for it on the, if you want to go look it up at geekbytespodcast.com, our recommendation section. but you can also go listen to the audio sample for yourself at Audible. I will link in the show notes if you want to go check it out. Okay, so these are some of the other stories that I'm not reviewing this week that'll be hitting this week. I'm going to list them off for you just so you know that they're out there. We have They Fight Three Giants, which is a short story in the Caverns and Creatures collection. We have Spellbinder, The Shadow Legacy. And then the Eternal Dragonborn, World of Game Book 2, also came out this week. Eden's Gate, The Sparrow. Additionally, again from the Synaptic, a LitRPG adventure, Epic of Our Beneficence. I haven't heard of it, but it shows up on an Amazon search for LitRPG. Also, Level 0, a LitRPG adventure, the Next World Series Book 1. And one that I'm actually currently reading, Stay on the Wing, The Dark Herbalist Book 2 will be out June 2nd, which is the day that most of these podcast people would listen and watch the podcast. That comes out on June 2nd. I got an early review copy of it. I wasn't able to finish it in time to put it on this week's podcast, unfortunately. So it's going to go with next week's podcast. But I'm enjoying what I read so far. So if you're a fan of that series, this is a good pickup so far. I haven't read the end, so I don't know if there's anything weird happening. But for me, I just, couldn't finish it this week. Okay. In upcoming LitRPG, I'll be reading off the June and July list of books I have scheduled to come out. On June the 6th, it's going to be Stone Raiders Return, Emerald Book 6. On June 15th, it'll be Restoration, The Rise of Resurgence Book 2. On July the 1st, it's going to be Hero of Not. On the 6th of July, it'll be The Curse of the Rion Castle, The Nero Book 2. On the 12th of July, it's going to be Codename Freedom, Survival Week 1, which I talked about a little bit last week. On the 14th of July, it'll be The First Planet, The Space Masters 1. Also on the 15th of July, it'll be Kingdom Level 3. So there you go. We have a few titles for August, but you can look at anything beyond that. Of course, on our Facebook page, the pin post there has upcoming list of all this I could find, and also on our recommendation page for the LitRPG Podcast and, Geek Bites Podcast. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. Okay, first novel in new releases and reviews is Hero of Thera, written by Eric Newland. I hope I'm saying this name right, but if it's not, I apologize. This is a 570-page novel, a honkin' thing. It is $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Full disclosure, Eric was nice enough to send me an early review copy. I purchased the novel outright once it became available. I liked it that much. A summary of the synopsis is that Hector is a computer geek who is sitting on death row for a bombing attack he never committed. He's visited by a demon who offers to send him to a new fantasy world ruled by RPG mechanics. Hector Savage takes him up on the offer, but first he must pass the free trial period to prove that he's worth the Lord of Abyss's faction support in a game world where the stakes are higher than Hector can ever imagine. If Hector can't survive his trial period, then he's bound to a fate worse than death. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, this is actually a really good story. And it's just so full. It's actually a really good page turner for me. Definitely one of my favorite novels of the entire week. Now, it's actually a little difficult to talk to you about it because there's so many interesting plot details I don't want to spoil for you guys. But as far as the story goes, it's really good, and there are plenty of twists in it to make it interesting. The main character gets goes on a lot of seemingly unrelated quests, but by the end of the story, everything is tied up. You're like, oh, so that's what all those little things meant. And it's really nicely packaged and written and plotted out. There's tons of action in the story, a little bit of intrigue between like the major powers in the universe who vie over power through the game world of Thera. Now, as far as the story mechanics in the game go, they're super detailed, which I personally love. I prefer more detail over less. And I really liked learning about all the cool abilities, weapons, items, factions in the game world of Thera. There's more than enough information given by the author just for you to roll your own character if you want to go on one of those imaginary trips in this game world. Personally, I would be a Ent Sun Mage which is a very interesting combination because you take in sunlight, at the same time it nourishes you, and that's your power source. But again, that just kind of reflects how much information I got that I could roll my own character in my mind as I'm reading the story. Overall, again, great story. I really just read this in a couple of sittings. It's that good of a page turner. The ending ties up all the loose ends, so you don't have to worry about wondering what's going to happen next. There's no cliffhanger. It's a good standalone story, but it also leaves room for the next book in this series, which the author at the end says he's already writing. So it's really nice. And even though the end is a little over the top, it's still a really satisfying conclusion to the novel, and I can wholeheartedly recommend this story for anybody who's looking for a good action lit RPG story. So there you go. Gets a score of 8 out of 10. Okay, and our next story is going to be Grimoire Bound, written by Jeff Sproul. It is about 200 pages. Amazon doesn't have a page estimate yet for it. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. The author's synopsis of this reads as, Jackson awakes in a world completely unfamiliar to him. His memories are clouded except for images of glass and metal. He quickly finds that he's not alone in this new realm. There are others who all arrived just as he did. Okay, so it's very mysterious. And that's kind of a theme with the story, which is good and bad. The novel really does drop you in what at first appears to be a fantasy world where the main character, he's stark naked. He doesn't have any memory of what's happening to him, and he wakes up on a stone altar. He makes his way to the shore only to be attacked by mermen. Our unnamed character is rescued by some guards that happen to be nearby and is taken to a nearby city. There, the main character remembers his name, Jackson, and we get our first glimpses into the RPG story aspects of the world. As it's revealed to him, things like health, mana, stats, special magic effects, spells on the world. And that is really, and after that, it's really a series of battles and scene changes that take the main character to different places in the world. Okay, that's kind of the story in a nutshell. And it kind of talks about some of the things I really liked about it, some things I didn't enjoy so much. There are some really odd changes in the story that I'm not going to spoil for you. But at one point, the main character actually jumps ahead like 10 years in time, which is a little weird, and also a big kind of red flag that this story is trying really hard to be smart. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it when you do things like huge time jumps, you're assuming that at some point the reader's going to figure out that there's a point to all these different little breadcrumbs you're leaving, and that's kind of a risk when that's not what the reader's expecting. Because part of the description, almost nowhere in the description is this described as any kind of mystery whatsoever. But in part it is. So just be aware that when you're going to, there's going to be some stuff that's not explained until like the very, very end of the story. And at that point, it'll all be tied back together. But for a good portion of the story, I'm wondering like, okay, what's the point of this? Or how does this tie into the other thing that I just read? And, it can be a little confusing occasionally. Additionally, there are also some revelations within the story, like after that time jump, where it makes everything happen previously, makes you look at it in a different light. There are weird plot devices, including like nameless gods, time magic, mimics, and that's all really cool once you get to the end of the story and it's all tied together. But in the moment, a lot of it is very confusing, or just not confusing, but like just not clear. If you can just appreciate the story as just like the action elements or just the various fight scenes that occur one after another, you're probably gonna have a really good time with the story. But again, for me, where it all kind of came together was at the very end. There's a twist ending at the end, which I'm not going to spoil again. But I in retrospect, I should have seen it coming. And again, it's one of those stories like where you get to the end, there's a twist, and you look back on it and you're like, oh. And that's the kind of story that this is. As far as the little RPG aspects of the story, they're minimal. And the author has done this intentionally because it's part of the revelation to the main character of where he's at. That this is a universe where there are RPG mechanics. But again, it's revealed slowly to the main character, which means that it's revealed slowly to us, the reader. There are mechanics such as levels, health, status effects, stats. But what makes this particularly odd to me is that that information is really only accessible through artifacts called grimoires that are rare enough that they're usually like one per town. So for the main character to get access to those side information, that RPD stuff, he actually has to travel to the middle of a town, put it down in the book, and then you get like that character sheet. But outside of that particular context, the main character doesn't see that information. It's still part of the culture, which is why this story is still LitRPG, even though those things aren't as put forward as I personally would have liked. Those things like character stats, strength, dexterity, magic, all those things are part of the culture of this world. So even though they're not discussed in hard number format, there are social taboos that talk about those things. And so it's very much a part of the very fabric of the story. It's just that within this first novel, it's very mysterious. And again, that's a plus and a minus, depending on how you're looking at it in the particular story. And again, a lot of that's towards the end of the story. Again, all this becomes more pronounced, like the main character starts to train his abilities and that specifically, so that he, kind of power levels a little bit. But again, a lot of that doesn't come into play until like late game story. So there you go. Again, one of the major flaws. Oh, this is a big just pet peeve personally, so you can skip it if it doesn't apply to you. One of the major flaws in the game mechanics story is that it references health, magic, and stamina in terms of percentages, which is such a huge. It just bugs me. And I'm honestly, I don't mind seeing that kind of stuff when it's in comment, like, oh, this character hit me for like 25% of my health. Great. I get that you don't want to like put actual numbers during comment. That's fine. But on a character sheet, if you're still referencing health and stamina magic in terms of percentages, it loses its meaning, because those percentages don't mean anything unless they're actually tied to real numbers. If you see them on the main character sheet that his health is 65%, I have to wonder what that means, because you never told me what it is at 100%, like what the actual number is. So it's a small thing for me, but it does kind of bug me, and that's just me personally. So there you go. Overall, it's a good story. If you can stick around to the end, there are some flaws that I talked about. And again, a lot of the events in the story just don't make sense until the very end. And some of the battles seem like random monster encounters without the setup or the explanation that it's the case. And for a good portion of the story, it really just felt like the main character is following other people around up until like the last 25% of the novel, in which case the main character takes more agency over his fate. But still, for me personally, I'm glad I stuck around to the end. I enjoyed the ending. It kind of tied everything together nicely. But it gets a score of a 6 out of 10. Okay, on to our next story, Terra Reforma, a post-apocalyptic LitRPG series by, I'm going to guess this is I.S. Halavey. It could be an L, it could be an I, I'm not sure. This is 306 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read the author's description of the story. Terra Reforma, the virtual game world set in a time period after humanity hit the reset button, a time after the bombs dropped, and before society was able to reform into the tech-driven megacities it consists of now. For many players, the grind of the game is more than just a brief escape from the real world. It's the perfect drug. It's their way of into the next rung of society. It's the answer to the question of life. FaZe Gannon and Kim Bitt are both looking for their own answers. Even though their paths cross in the city of New San Diego, it's Terra Reforma that holds vindication for both of them. So there you go. This novel is actually two distinct stories. There's really no crossover between them from those two main characters that were described by the author, except in the very beginning of the story. Like they meet and then they go off on their own paths and they never meet again. So I'd actually think of this as just two distinct stories that happen to be contained within the same novel. The first story is about a guy who wakes up with amnesia, but knows he has to log back into Terra Reforma. You follow him as he creates his character and completes a bunch of new quests. That's the real LitRPG portion of this novel. Now, the second narrative is about Kim, a hacker girl who got banned from the game, put in jail, and is for using game exploits. Her life goes to hell, and she goes on the lam from the authorities in a cyberpunk reality and scours the shadiest parts of the city to find a way back into the game. So those are your two kind of story points. And again, they're very distinct. They don't, I was expecting them at some point to cross back and meet each other. And they didn't. And that was kind of something that I'm like, oh, these are really should be two different stories. And, that took off a little bit of the story for me. Another thing that kind of bugged me is that every few pages, the story changes perspectives between, FaZe, the guy with amnesia, and in a game world, and Kim, who's in the real world, the cyberpunk world. And because the stories don't ever connect again, I felt like you could have just had them told separately, like all Kim's story, all of FaZe's story, and it would have made more sense, and it would have been a little more coherent. Now again, the part with FaZe and him being a VR MMO, that's total LitRPG. There's a bunch of game mechanics there. He chooses a smuggler class, which is really interesting. I like that within this game, there's a bunch of ways to play it. Not all conflicts have to be solved at combat. That there are non-violent ways of completing these quests, and that there's even a little bit of crafting in the story. That's all really cool. The dystopian stuff with Kim just wasn't interesting to me because I was expecting something else. The novel labels itself as LitRPG, so I'm expecting when I read this thing for it to be mostly that, or at least a coherent story where the game stuff interplays with the real life storyline. They mix them and they make sense. In this particular case, that is not going to happen. The real world stuff is separate. It's a storyline, and the game stuff is separate. It's a storyline. Again, the author really could have just published them as two different stories, and I probably would have enjoyed the LitRPG stuff more because it would have just been its own story. Overall, again, it's an okay story. Not because there's such an interesting mix. Neither one really stands out on its own. And I would have personally liked to have seen them developed in depth separately. And I think they would have been better off. It's just me though. It gets a score of about a 5 out of 10. Okay, on to our next story, Reternity Online Rescue Quest, a LitRPG epic written by Baron Sword. Okay, it is 555 pages, long book, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read to you the author's description of the story. It's a little long, so I might cut some of it off. Logan hated full immersion virtual reality MMORPGs like Reternity Online. He'd watched his younger brother Jason and countless friends throw away their lives because of their addiction to playing RO. He vowed that he'd never put on a Neuralink headset and waste his life away like they did. Then he received an anonymous email from kidnappers demanding real-world ransom of $150,000 to release his sister Emily, who they held in an undisclosed locations. To keep her compliant, the kidnappers used a Neuralink headset to lock her permanently into RO. In-game, Emily's character was locked away where no one could find her. Okay, that's enough of the author from to give you an idea of what the storyline is. And again, that's basically the premise. Logan Byron hates VR MMOs, but he's willing to go into the game of Returnity Online to try to find where she's at in the game to get hints about where she's being located outside of the game. And the story is a little complex because it also involves like his sister going internationally to Thailand, I think, or a country close by, where she's doing she's building churches and hospitals and whatnot. But then when she goes to party, she's kidnapped apparently. And part of the story takes place in that real world setting. And there's some very interesting storylines here, and some of it's done well, and some of it just takes a little too long. The fundamental premise of like the main character going to the game to find his sister kind of reminds me of Sword Art Online, that second season storyline, except without the lovable main character, which is kind of a huge flaw in the story. But going into the story, reading this novel, I really wanted to like it. The author was nice enough to give the podcast nod at the back of his book, but there are just a lot of issues that took away from my enjoyment of the story, unfortunately. Some things that I really liked about the story. The author does a really good job of capturing the complicated relations between the brothers in the story, between Jason and Logan. Logan's our main character. He, again, hates MMOs. He hates that entire online community of players. He feels like that's a waste of their lives because he feels like his brother Jason is an MMO addict. So I get that part of it. But at the same point, he's also kind of yells at his brother, Jason, for the way he chooses to live his life as an adult in an MMO in this case. And that kind of conflict is completely normal, and it was very well written. It was very realistic, and I like that social dynamic of those brothers, how good it was. So that's a big plus for me. The action is well written in the story. It's varied. There are a lot of different enemies for the main character and his group fights. The game mechanics story do have some depth. You can tell the author put a lot of time into creating them. And not just the action stuff either, but also social and reputation consequences in the game. I thought that was a very interesting mechanic to layer into a primarily action-oriented game. Now, on to things I didn't like. This is a much longer list. There's a really long setup at the beginning of the story that goes on way too long, in my opinion, where the main character describes in agonizing detail exactly how much he hates virtual reality gaming and gaming addiction in general. Again, the description that I gave you was like a very small, like it goes on for a long time. Also, the real life search by Logan for his sister at the beginning of the story, again, it just goes on a little too long. Like the summary I got from the author was more than enough to get me to understand that Logan logs into the game as a last resort to find his sister. So that, I mean, I get that it is what it is. Also, now this is to me the biggest flaw in the story. The main character, Logan, is just such a jerk. I mean, he's a total butthead. He's pessimistic. He's judgmental of gamers and the AI and his family, especially. And it makes it very hard to empathize with him, especially when he starts to getting a little hypocritical in his viewpoints. In that he's, just rags on all those stupid loser gamers who spend their time in the virtual world and have virtual reality girlfriends, and but that the first time he logs into the game during the tutorial section, he starts to flirt with the NPC who's training him, and there's a relationship that eventually develops. And so, like I said, it's just hard to like the main character and root for him. Very early in the story, I almost wanted him to be killed over and over again. He's that unlikable, especially at the beginning of the story. And again, other flaws in the story is that during the beginning portion of the story, when the main character is logging in, creating his character, there's no real urgency about saving his sister suddenly. Like it's established that she's in a bad spot. And in the real world, the main character does everything he can to try to find her to no avail. But then once he's in the game, he feels like that's his last resort. It feels like he takes an awful long time to hook up with his brother, who's a high-level character, and try to search for her in the game. So it's just a small story flaw that kind of brought the overall feel of the story down for me a little bit. Additionally, while I like the idea of behaviors having consequence in the story, it's a good mechanic. How it's implemented in the story seems a little arbitrary. Like the definitions of good actions and evil actions are sometimes inconsistent and very arbitrary. And that just took a little bit away from it for me. Also, there's a twist in the sister's kidnapping narrative. Part of the storyline in the novel is telling what happened to the sister from her point of view. Like it details the events of her being in another country, what happened with her, and there's that's seriously part of the narrative, and there's some twist in there that's just like, oh, that was interesting, and I'm like, that's also annoying, and depending how you look at it, but for me, it's like, oh, that was weird. So overall, it's an okay read. The actual game story isn't bad. Like that stuff where they go on adventures, the main character levels up, finds a group, all that stuff on its own, had it been its own independent novel, would have been fine. It would probably, to me, been a slightly better novel. It's just a bunch of other stuff around it kind of takes away from that enjoyment of that core adventure storyline. And again, the flaw that I mentioned also drag it down a little bit for me. So it is what it is, unfortunately. Gets a score of about a 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, next novel, Dragon Web Online Dominion, written by S.R. Witt. This is actually the second book in this series. I believe this series is called The Electric Shadows. Now, if you look at the particular cover art for the story, it really does remind me of the Borg from Star Trek The Next Generation, but don't don't be fooled by it. It has nothing to do with like that much sci-fi stuff. It's a fantasy based action adventure RPG, virtual reality MMORPG kind of storyline. So, but I think that the cover art does kind of point you in a different direction than it might actually be. The novel is 686 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And again, this is one of those novels that went by fairly quickly because it is such an enjoyable read. In the first book, two brothers signed up to play a full immersion virtual reality game to earn some money to pay their bills and to pay for their mom's medical treatment. The game is unique in that players don't choose their class. The game does based upon what the players do, their actions. One brother, Bastian, gets a warrior type that he hopes to turn into a paladin. He plans to make his brother become a cleric, but the game has other ideas. Our main character, Saint, becomes a thief. Through some interesting adventures, the two manage to get enough money to pay their bills. And that's essentially the storyline of their first novel. There were some flaws in it, like a lack of game mechanics, but overall, it was a pretty decent read. Now in book 2, though, the brothers are still trying to earn money to make a living and to take care of their mom's medical expenses. However, forces in the game are getting larger and they're pushing the main character, Saint, down a path that he never intended to go and one that may change the game forever. Yeah, we're actually getting a slightly more epic storyline in this particular novel. And it's actually, it's done really well. The cover art I made 2 notes about it. That's how much it kind of bothered me. Like, is that the Boar Queen? I don't remember her being in this story at the end of it. But again, it's actually a rather good story. Not only do we finally get to learn why this series is called Dragon Web, or the game is, there's also a ton of LitRPG goodness. There's a lot more detail in this particular story than there was in the first novel. Like even the game main character in the story notes, as I'm playing the game is giving me much more information than it did in the beginning. And I'm like, that's a great way to like change your game mechanics. There's actually so much information in the story that the author goes so far as to actually give the reader actual formulas for how he's figuring out things like damage notifications, whether skill checks succeed. There's a ton of numbers. Not so many that it's distracting, but for me, as somebody who enjoys that kind of information, like, as much detail as possible, it was nice to see the change in that particular aspect of it. The real-world storyline in this particular novel really just seemed to exist to push the main character and his brother into playing the game as much as possible. So don't expect too much from the real-world story. There are some tear-jerky moments that are commentaries about like the healthcare system in the future, the things that people have to do to survive in this more technologically dependent society, but there's not much more than that. The dynamics between the two brothers, really well done. I noted that in the first review I gave for the book 1. That was one of the highlights, that their relationship is very real. The older brother wants to be in charge. He's used to telling his brother what to do and imposing consequences when he doesn't listen to him. That's a very older brother thing to do. But at the same point, in the storyline, it's also partially a coming-of-age story where the main character, Saint, is learning to be his own man. And to not only in the story does he stand up to his brother, but at some points he's actually manipulating his brother into doing what he really wants to do, but making him think that it's his brother's idea. So there's a lot of social coming-of-age aspects to this particular story as well, which I thought was really nice and cool. Overall, again, this is an improvement over the first novel. The part of the story that I really enjoyed the most for book 2 was the section that's set in the city, which is approximately half of the novel, like 50-60%. And in the city portion of it, I think the novel shines because that is the place where you see so many forces pulling on the main character and trying to make him into something that he's not sure he wants to be, whether it's the thieves or the church or his brother or whatever. I think that story is kind of the core of the coming of age portion of it for the main character, not just becoming more powerful within the game, but also as a real person, even outside the game. So I like that the best. After that, the main character has a group of adventurers and they go on this epic quest to, save the world or whatever. And that is fine. It's not bad there, but it becomes more action oriented and a little more standard for adventure stories, which is not bad again. There's a good twist at the end as well that I didn't see coming. But again, the part I liked the most was probably that first 60% of it in the city. But again, real enjoyable read, had a good time. Gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. Okay, on to Fantasy Online, Hyperborea, written by Harmon Cooper. He's the author of the Feedback Loop series. Now, this novel actually takes place in that same multi-universe. So you might, if you've read that other series, you'll get a few more references than I did. I've only read the first few novels in that series. And I read them. So I don't get all the references, but I kind of get the point of it being like a multi-universe with different games in that universe, and this is one of them. Okay, it is 570 pages, $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Full disclosure, I received an early copy for review, but purchased it when it became available. Now again, this is, I'll read the author's synopsis first. 19-year-old Raizuke Matsuki and his best friend Tamana decide to start over with new avatars in the game Hyperborea. When Tamara is suddenly killed right in front of him in Tokyo subway, Reik knows there is only one place he can search for her, Tritania, the world's most popular online fantasy world. Standing in his way are the mysterious guild known as the Shinigami, his older brother, a Yakuza crime lord hellbent on squashing his dreams. As a lowly ballistic mage, Ryuk must quickly recruit guild members, level up, and loot and shoot his way across Tritania to discover the dark and sinister secret behind Tamana's untimely death. Joining him in his quest are a famous Swedish gamer, a powerful half-dragon, half-human female assassin, and a devious axe-wielding goblin. So there you go. This is actually one of the few LitRPG stories that I've read recently where the real world storyline is as interesting as the game one. And that's really where most of the time the real world storyline is either its own independent story that should be considered separate, or it's just there as a place that the main characters occasionally return to. And in this case, because a lot of the dynamics between the two brothers, between our main character and his Yakuza brother, happen in the real world, that again this is a very brotherly episode. Apparently that dynamic is utterly fascinating to me, and the way they treat each other, how Reik is trying to become his own man, but standing up against his very mob boss brother, is very interesting, and it's a very good story. I want to point that out. So there you go. But again, most of the novel does take place in the game, so don't worry about it. It is LitRPG, and most of the story is just the main character, Ryu, gathering allies, getting cool gear, leveling up to move the main plot forward. Like something like 60% of the novel is just him going on adventures in the 2 days that he has prior to meeting up with the kidnappers to try to give them ransom money or whatever. And it's not a bad section of the story. It's very action adventure-y, and you get a lot of information about the members of the guild that he recruits. A favorite character of mine is going to be Hiccup, who starts out in the story as being just this bumbling idiot goblin who fails in protecting and guarding the guild and the main character's best friend who gets kidnapped. But he develops throughout the story as being really funny, humorous, irreverent, and probably my favorite character in the entire story, including like the main character. Second up would be Feetwix, who's the live streaming heartthrob, also a very fun character. But again, don't expect that main plotline that the author described in the synopsis to really develop until like 60% in the novel. Everything before that is essentially level up, get loot, become stronger, a little background information for the other guild characters. But that main plotline doesn't really develop until like the last third, fourth of the story. So there you go. Also, there's a nice twist ending at the end that I really didn't see coming. I mean, like I probably should have. I'm sure there was some, foreshadowing in there somewhere. Also, bad guys cheat apparently, and it's kind of a cheat ending. But it is what it is. I get that why the author did it, and kind of the way he's just twisting a knife in the reader's heart a little bit while he does it. So, I get it. It was a nice ending though. Overall, had a really nice time reading the story. Besides the part where I think the storyline could have shortened itself up and gotten to the main plot a little sooner. That's it. It was a good action read and I had a good time. Gets a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, next one, Into the Black, a sci-fi lit RPG story, book 1, game start, a long title. It is written by Stuart Gross, which is also the name of the main character. So there you go. It is a short story, 91 pages, 99 cents, very appropriately priced. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited, however. I can tell you right off the bat, good story. I enjoyed it. It is the first 10% of it reads like a straight sci-fi story. So if you get a sample of this novel and trying to decide if it's LitRPG or not, the sample is not a really good section because it's just straight sci-fi. And I almost put it down thinking that, oh, this is not really LitRPG, but I push past the 10% and the rest of the novel is absolute LitRPG. You can trust me on that. It's really nice. But I should warn you, there is some sex in the story. It's like a few sentences, almost like a couple paragraphs at about the 54% mark in the story. I skipped over it. It's not my thing. But I know it offends some people. So I'm just giving you a heads up that it does exist in the story. Again, the first 10% reads like a straight sci-fi novel. I mean, like space opera. But then it's revealed afterwards that it's really just a demo played by a wheelchair using former Navy man who is beta testing the first full immersion virtual reality rigs for a game company. I know. Then he agrees to test a long-term virtual reality pod in nightmare mode, which is like the super hard version of this game, to get like the best beta tester bonuses. So that's kind of the setup of the story to get you into the game world. Now, once he's in the game, he's plugged into a immersive sci-fi world where he takes the character of Muricon Molan, a chimera or genetic combination of other species. So he gets a really hard race class to play. He also chooses a difficult character class as well, the Infiltrator, who specializes in information gathering, shapeshifting, and psionic attacks. So it's a challenge on challenge on challenge for the main character. But of course, he also gets a bunch of bonus skill points to develop the character when he's creating. So there's a trade-off. Now, a lot of the story is just game mechanic description, like from like the 20 to 37% mark. It's all character creation section. So there's a lot of game mechanic explanation within this like 17% of the story. There's a lot of backstory that's just given all in one shot. Again, this is a relatively short story, so I understand why the author has to kind of do this. The main character actually logs into the full game at about the 38% mark, and the rest of it is well, a good portion of it, I should say, is just action, story, infiltration, spy stuff, sci-fi stuff, and it's a really fun story as far as I'm concerned. The main character starts out in a lab, and he has to figure out how to get out of there because he's a science experiment instead of being trained to be like this super spy, murder agent, assassin thing. All the RPG mechanics start coming into play, and it's really fun, and there's an action, adventure, murder, again, a little bit of sex stuff, so be aware of that. But again, there's quite a bit of plot packed into like this small story. I'm really surprised. And again, it's a short read, super enjoyable. The last like 10% of it though is just appendices. It's about, glossaries, the character sheets, ability descriptions, glossary of characters. So there's a little padding at the end, so be aware of that as well. Overall, it's a score of 7 out of 10. Had a nice time reading it. It's like 99 cents. Can't go wrong. Okay, last story. It is Eyrth Online. It is written by Gabriel Rathwig. He actually remembered to put his name on the title, on the cover art this time. Episode 3, De Trois. That's all I'm going to call it, De Trois. Okay, it is 50 pages, short story. It's $1 though. It is also available on Kindle Unlimited, so go support this guy. It's a fun story. The author's description of the story is just this. Welcome back, true believers. The adventures of our weed-loving hero Lawrence Rath continue. After saving the day yet again, he is back for some more dancing, fighting, flying, and crowing. No, seriously, it's just another stoner adventure. And that's kind of the thing I love about the story, is that the author he just says what it is. He doesn't pretend that it's anything. It's not epic fantasy. It's not epic LitRPG. There's no huge save the world aspect or AI is coming to life and becoming self-aware thing going on there. It's just a stoner action adventure comedy, and he delivers every single time. I had a really good time reading it. I loved the Captain Planet David Hasselhoff references in the story. There's a ton of fun jokes, pop culture references. The author teases us about the main character's uncle's death. He doesn't fulfill any of it. It's just a huge tease. This author's a huge tease. You can quote me on that. But again, this is a fun action stoner story that doesn't pretend to be anything else, so don't expect anything else. I had a good time reading it. There's a really good playlist. Like, remember, this particular series has a music playlist that you're supposed to play with at the beginning of each chapter as you're reading it, and it gives you kind of theme music. And this particular time around, it's an international version. There's a lot of French, German music going on here. And I was pleasantly surprised about how many of these songs that I actually really liked. I especially like the one called Zoo Bizou Bizou. I never heard of it. It's like a 70s kind of mix thing that I like. So really good playlist as well. The novel gets a score of a 7 out of 10 for me. There you go. And that's it. We're done. Finished. Complete. I know, folks. 8 stories, 8 reviews, and that was only like half of what came out this week. So thank you for listening and watching. Remember, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, Patreon. Plenty of ways to support the podcast. You can find them all at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, until we can hang out, we can talk about LitRPG again. You can hear me goof off and geek out about this thing that I love so much doing every single week. Remember, folks, to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye. Adios. See you later. Okay, show notes up. Stretches. Oh, that would feel good. I'm getting too old. Maybe I'm just typing away at the keyboard too much today. Oh. You'd think, quitting your job and writing full time would be less work, but it turns out it's more. Who knew? Get land face. Let me face. Land face. Let me face. La 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 la. I want to suck your blood. Oh. Okay. Looks like I'm all ready to go. Get this party started. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. Gonna hit the show. Ready to go in 3, 2, 1, and pretend 1, real 1, go.